from a regulator, we go to one of the leaders in the industry that is calling the shots about doing business. So we want 180 degrees. So I'm very glad to welcome, now I'll do your job, TJ.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome Lauren Nemeth, the SVP and GM of Communication Platform from Twilio.
Hi, good morning. My name is Lauren Nemeth. I lead, it says Communications Platform, but that's kind of a fancier title to say all of our messaging businesses at Twilio. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about some of the areas of innovation that we're seeing from a messaging perspective. As you probably know, we work with about 300,000 customers directly all across the world. So we see a lot of different innovation on the platform, from really big companies all the way down to long-tail developers. So I want to give you some perspective in terms of what we see. But I want to start out by just saying none of this is going to be possible without a trusted ecosystem. So one thing I want to make sure that we're all working on today, and obviously TCR is a really important backbone to all of this, is building trust with consumers is the most important thing that we can actually do as an industry. So we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing there as well. So first, I like to start with where we all came from an A to P perspective. 30 years ago, this was kind of the first message. Fast forward, we are now sending trillions of A to P messages globally, which is amazing. And we're powering, quite frankly, really cool use cases. So if you think about the retail use case, I can now give my information directly to a retailer and say, hey, talk to me about these products and show me things that I care about. Let me know when things are actually going on sale, which is an awesome experience for the consumer. Or even as you kind of think about hospitality, right? There's so many ways that you can think about the Cheesecake Factory down the street, making sure you know that your reservation is up, or here's your receipt from an order. It's an awesome and beautiful experience for consumers. And even in terms of financial services, I want to be able to have a trusted one-to-one direct conversation with my financial advisor, and messaging is actually a beautiful way to do that. So we've transformed almost every relationship that you can think of globally, but I actually think the opportunity is much bigger. So a little bit of background on me. I do not come from the telco space. So I've been at Twilio for 2 years. All of my background is actually in marketing and advertising. And the reason I came to Twilio, and also the reason why I'm leading our messaging businesses, is actually about this opportunity right here. So we run an amazing business, which is largely, I would say, a verification use case today. If you look on the Twilio platform, actually this year alone, the largest use case, bar none, is actually a marketing use case. We've seen 2,000% growth this year alone in that use case. And you could say, like, okay, Lauren, why is that happening? And the main thing is, if you look at Apple's ATT, what they did is they kind of like cut the knees off basically for Facebook and Google and a lot of other companies out there who are already estimating $16 billion in loss. So think of this, if you're a marketer, that $16 billion doesn't go away, right? Your budgets continue to exist, but these marketers are now looking for a new means to communicate with their end consumers. And if you look at messaging, it's a beautiful way to think about earned media. Consumers are raising their hand, they want to have a direct relationship with you, and marketers are saying, I would love to take a lot of my digital advertising budget and take it away from Google and take it away from Facebook and actually bring it towards messaging. So we have this opportunity, but the question is, how do you capitalize on it? So like I mentioned in the beginning, the only way that we are going to capitalize on this opportunity, and quite frankly, the opportunities in messaging at large, is actually building a trusted ecosystem, which I would say, particularly in the last year and a half or so, we've made amazing strides in this area. That said, there's also a lot of communication now going towards messaging, which is creating a lot of noise for the end consumer. And so it's not just about sending more messages, but it's actually about sending much more relevant messages to the end consumer. From a verification perspective, I would say that the ecosystem is finally here. And I know, at least in the breakfast beforehand, I heard a lot of chatter about this, but we've all as an industry done a pretty heavy lift as of late to take this really, really seriously. Now, granted, there's a lot more work that we still have to do, and we can talk about how to best do that. But I do think we are finally there, which is great. And knowing your customer is the baseline by which we are going to operate. The one thing I would note, and I think this is where we need to keep the dialogue going, is making sure that this does not stifle innovation. So we want to make sure that we know who the end customers are, we're building a really trusted ecosystem, but we're still enabling as much innovation as possible to occur. And so the way that we see that is, I'd say in a few areas. From a verification use case, I'd say at Twilio in particular, we're actually really bullish on silent auth. The reason we're really bullish on silent auth is, as you think about it today, carriers actually have a lot more information about you as a consumer that is much more valuable to verify your identity as opposed to me sending you a one-time passcode. And I think us being able to use that silent authorization to, one, make sure that verification rates are actually higher, but two, to basically eliminate the noise that's associated with a one-time password or two-factor authentication use case. So this is something that you'll see we did an investment in Boku as of late, but this is actually a lot more where we're kind of seeing the industry move forward. The second piece, and you can kind of see this beautiful RCS example here, which we're going to also talk about in the next section about the future of RCS and sort of what the take is on that, but consumers want rich experiences. Like, make absolutely no mistake about that. What we at least see is that RCS is an amazing experience if you have an Android device. I have very little faith that iOS is ever going to adopt RCS. And if you look at the North American opportunity itself, which obviously a lot of us are focused on today, the majority of consumers have iOS devices. As a result, put yourself now back in the CMO's shoes. Am I going to create a campaign that's only going to be relevant for 40% of the North American audience? Like, no, that's a pain. And so actually the proliferation that we're seeing is actually more around MMS. And MMS is great because it works across iOS and Android. I think there's a lot of ways that we can improve MMS collectively as an industry, and I'll kind of get to that in a second. But even beyond that marketing use case, consumers actually want to fulfill the transaction within messaging itself. I've got a few anecdotes from actually a consumer survey that we just did with about 10,000 consumers. And 77% of them actually want conversational commerce. That would be their preference. And 58% would prefer messaging to actually fulfill purchases as opposed to other means. So we see consumers raising their hands saying, this is actually a beautiful way for me to interact with marketing communications, and I don't just want you to tell me about special offers and discounts that you have. I actually want to fulfill a lot of those transactions directly through the message itself. This does mean some upgrading, I would say, that we kind of need to look at from an industry perspective. So one piece on MMS is, I wouldn't say as an industry we've all said that this is going to be a first-class citizen, and one thing that I would recommend is that is something, at least for the time being, that we make a first-class citizen. This would actually make, for a lot of CMOs out there, 100% of their budget addressable across consumers in North America. The second piece is the throughput that we at least see from an MMS perspective is actually less than the demand. We see, at least at Twilio, almost 40% in excess wanting to use MMS, but there's actually not enough throughput to satisfy their needs. And the last piece, which I think is a really cool example, is group texting. So for anyone who's bought a house, right, it's something that maybe you're doing with your partner. There's a title agent involved, there's an insurance broker, there's a real estate agent, there's a lot of people involved. And how great would it be to have one centralized communication with one paper trail of all of that? We can actually facilitate that. And that's not actually something I think as an industry we've sort of decided we want it to. So these are all thought-provoking ideas for everybody in the audience. And the last thing I note is most of the disruption we're seeing in marketing automation is actually coming from ISVs. So these are people actually building software on top of email and messaging as various communication channels. And I think one thing that we're really focused on is really trying to provide as much transparency as possible in terms of verified business identities. It's also about building really smart ways for them to shape traffic and throughput in this ecosystem and incentivizing good actors. ISVs and a lot of at the end of the day have to educate their down funnel customers about all the changes that are happening in the ecosystem. The more that we can empower them, which is obviously a lot of our role at Twilio, I think we will continue to find more software companies building on top of messaging and actually addressing a lot of interesting use cases for consumers. So I think what I kind of leave you with today is hopefully some hope and optimism that messaging can actually continue to transform more and more customer relationships, even yet again. And I think particularly as we look at the marketing opportunity, I think there's a lot of, I'd say, financial opportunity for everyone in the room, but I think also a great opportunity to build trust with consumers where we're providing them with the type of messaging that they're actually looking for. And that's it.
Does anyone have any questions for Lauren?
Hello. Hello. Here.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, hi. So
What's
you
your
talked
name?
about 3 problems in the end. So how are you looking at solving the group texting problem? Because that needs a support from carriers, right?
That is a shameless plug for carriers, correct?
So you have a dependency on them.
I mean, I think we all do, right, as an industry. And so I do think that it's more about, here are some areas that we see opportunity across our customer base today. And I think the frustrating thing is a lot of these opportunities, because as an industry, we're probably not all on the same page, de facto sort of go to channels. And what I'm kind of trying to provoke in a lot of ways is that if we can collectively agree, hey, actually MMS does kind of make sense. Like that is something that works across iOS and Android. You know, throughput is like constraining for our ecosystem, and group texting actually is a really cool use case that we want to facilitate, that these are things that hopefully we can run through messaging and not sort of force into the hands of channels.
Okay, thank you.
You got it.
Hi, Lauren. My name is Yushi. I'm with Switchboard Labs.
Hi.
You spoke a lot about MMS. Have you seen a lot of demand for videos, video texting? And when we say video texting, we're not talking about 4 or 5 seconds, right? We're talking like 30 plus seconds.
Correct.
And if there is high demand, which I know there is, how's Twilio handling that?
So there is demand, right? And I think this kind of pushes you once again towards WhatsApp. This pushes you towards RCS. This pushes you towards what I would call consumer-constrained kind of ecosystems. And I think if you put your self in the mind of the actual CMO, they don't want to just address small populous bases. They want to address something much bigger. So MMS would be great for that. We do have a file size limit, obviously, on MMS today, which I don't think as an industry we've sort of revisited in quite some time. But yeah, it would be awesome. And if you look at the way that particularly younger generations are kind of consuming content, the way that they want to be interacted with, like video is without question incredibly engaging.
Yeah, the reason why I did this is just shameless plug, because what we do is
We can
have
all
video-
shamelessly plug.
Video compression technology where we're actually able to send 30 to sometimes even minute videos of high quality sound with closed caption, et cetera.
Yep,
So love to chat.
sounds good. Let's do it.
Hi, Rob Peguero. I'm the MC for this afternoon, so you'll be hearing more from me.
Awesome.
Conversational commerce, like the buzzword phrase there, but conversational commerce in the clear gives me some qualms. How do you get around the security issues that, you know, RCS has encryption, at least in transit, iMessage has encryption in transit and at rest? Most of us are accustomed to not do business on a site, I hope, without seeing that connection as well is encrypted. How do we get past this, given that Apple's the immovable object here, and on the other hand, obviously there is this interest?
That's a great question. I genuinely do not have the answer, though, to that, to that question, unfortunately. I think when I mention conversational commerce, it's more that the consumers that at least we've surveyed want to be able to have a conversation with, let's call it a salesperson at a retailer, to understand product discoverability. And how do we actually help consumers discover the products that they actually want through a two-way conversation with a sales representative? I think to your point of like encryption and obviously a lot of sensitive data around payment information, et cetera, that is, I think, for us as an industry to figure out how we address that.
Yeah, I'm Carlos De Silva from PCW Global. My question is more on the international aspect of, you talked about silent authentication. So SMS internationally is largely used for a one-time password verification.
Correct.
There's a lot of fraud going into this side of the market, artificial
Correct.
fraud, increasing prices, which feed even more increasing prices with fraud, etc.
Correct.
You talk about silent authentication. I know Twilio is something that does not rely on SMS at all. I wanted to see if you can share your view on how do you see that fraud impacting the industry, and if it impacts also the US, or it's just more something that is international only.
So it's actually the reason why we are so bullish on silent auth. To your point, there is a lot of fraud in one-time password, two-factor authentication. We see a lot of SMS pumping. We see a lot of things as sort of an industry, particularly internationally, which are pretty egregious. The nice thing about silent auth is because it's directly between us and the carrier and actually leveraging carrier data to verify who that individual is. We see basically like almost no fraud in that instance. The thing is that you have to get everybody in a certain geography to actually decide that they want to enable silent auth, and I think that's still the education process that we're going through. So it's still a relatively small TAM.
All right, thank you, Lachlan.
Thank you.
You're going to stick around.